George Washington. Washington was, I think, the typically good man. Take it as you please, but of course a remarkable one. No doubt at all he, personally, was 90% of the force which made of the American Revolution a successful issue. Know of what that force consisted, that is, the intimate character of its makeup, that is, Washington himself, and you will know practically all there is to understand about the beginnings of the American Republic. You will know, also, why a crown was offered this great hero at the conclusion of hostilities with Great Britain, and with what a hidden gesture he rejected the idea. Therein you have it. It was unthinkable, or he might have taken it. He was a man of tremendous vitality, buried in a massive frame, and under a rather stolid and untraceable exterior which the ladies somewhat feared, I fancy. He must have looked well to them from a distance, or say on horseback, but later it proved a little too powerful for comfort, and he wanted them too, violently. One can imagine him curiously alive to the need of dainty waistcoats, lace, and kid gloves, in which to cover that dangerous rudeness which he must have felt about himself. His interest in dress at a certain period of his career is notorious. The surveying contract which took him to Duquesne and the wilderness where thereabouts was, however, the other side of the question. In this he must have breathed a more serious air, which cannot but have penetrated to the deepest parts of his nature. The thing is, however, that in his case it did not, as it might have done, win him permanently to that kind of an existence. There was in his nature a profound spirit of resignation before life's rich proposals, which disarmed him. As he expressed it, to him it was always his vine and fig tree, home and quiet, for which he longed. Stress he could endure, but peace and regularity pleased him better. There must have been within him a great country whose wild paths he alone knew, and explored in secret and at his leisure. Patience, horses or a fine carriage, a widow to wife, a sloping lawn with a river at the bottom, a thriving field, an adopted daughter, that was as far as his desire wandered. All the rest he accepted as put upon him by chance. Resistance was, I believe, his code. Incited, a protector of the peace, or at least keeper of the stillness within himself. He was too strong to want to evade anything. That's his reputation for truth-telling. It was a good scratching to him to take it on and see himself through. He knew he would come through. There was his club life in Alexandria as a Mason, the 10-mile ride to church. It warmed him up a little. As for rebellion, I don't think it entered his mind. I don't see how it could, except from the rear, subconsciously. That fire was too subdued in him. As a commander of the troops, he resisted, struck and drew back, struck and doubled on his tracks, and struck again, then rested. He couldn't give in. He couldn't give in without such a ruffling within himself that he had no choice but to continue. That's the secret of Valley Forge, and the valor and patience of his battle, as great as the other, against an aimless, wavering Congress at Philadelphia. He couldn't give in. I believe he would have gone out and battled it alone if he had felt his army wasted from under him, or even left the country. Or else. Well, there is a night he wandered off alone near Morristown, I think, off toward the British lines on horseback, impatient of warning, to air himself, so to speak, under the stars. Something angry was stirred there. But 7 days in the week it was for him. Resist, be prudent, be calm. With a mad hell inside they might rise, might one day do something perhaps, brilliant, perhaps joyously abandoned, but not to be thought of. Such men suffering thus a political conversion of their emotions are, I suppose, always the noteworthy among us. Battle to them must be the expression of that something in themselves which they fear. Washington's calmness of demeanor and characteristics as a military leader were of that cloth. Some girl at Princeton, was it? Had some joke with him about a slipper at a dance. He was full of it. And there was the obscene anecdote he told that night in the boat crossing the Delaware. But apparently the one man who got it full, who saw him really roused, was General Lee, the one who wanted to replace him in command. That was all right. Washington could understand that and forgive it in another. He forgave Lee and restored him to his division with full trust after his return from capture by the British. But when, subsequently, Lee, in his direct disobedience of orders, forgetting his position and risking his own whim on an important decision before Monmouth lost the chance for an important victory. That was different. Immediately after, Washington met him by chance at a country crossroad and Lee got it. It is said no man, before or after, saw Washington in such a rage. This sort of thing Lee had done. He, Washington, knew from top to bottom. It was the firmly held part of himself which had broken loose in another. Should he, Washington, stop that resistance in himself? What would happen? No use to ask that now. Here it was, disaster. To Lee, then, in a fury, he opened the gates of his soul, and Lee saw such hellfire that it was the end of him. Retired, muttering and half silly, to his farm in Virginia where he stayed. The presidency could not have meant anything to Washington. I think he spoke the candid truth about it when he said he neither desired it nor sought it. He merely did his duty. He did it with wisdom, since he couldn't do it any other way. He wasn't enough interested to be scheming. Resist and protect. That was the gist of most that he said. Don't go looking for trouble. Stay home. In his very face, even, it was said in Congress he had turned monster under the name of prudence. A sort of non-describable chameleon-colored thing called prudence. Alexander Hamilton, a type that needed power, found all this quite to his liking. Washington let him do. He wanted to get back to Mount Vernon. America has a special destiny for such men, I suppose. Great wench lovers. There is a letter from Jefferson attesting it in the case of Washington. If that were needed, terrible leaders they might make if one could release them. It seems a loss not compensated for by the tawdry stuff bred after them, in place of a splendor too rare. They are a kind of American swan song, each one. The whole crawling mass gnaws on them, hates them. He was hated. Don't imagine he was not. The minute he had secured their dung heap for them, he had to take their dirt in the face. From deep within, you may count upon it, came those final words when, his head in a friend's lap, he said with difficulty, Doctor, I am dying, and have been dying for a long time. Adding to reassure them, but I am not afraid to die. He is a typical sacrifice to the mob, and in a great many ways thoroughly disappointing. Battle between the Bonhomme Richard and the Serapis. On board the ship Serapis, at anchor without the Texel in Holland, October 3rd, 1779. His Excellency Benjamin Franklin. Honored and dear sir, when I had the honor of writing to you on the 11th of August, previous to my departure from the road of Grog, I had before me the most flattering prospect of rendering essential service to the common cause of France and America. I had a full confidence in the voluntary inclination and ability of every captain under my command to assist and support me in my duty with cheerful emulation, and I was persuaded that every one of them would pursue glory in preference to interest. Whether I was or was not deceived will best appear by a relation of circumstances. The little squadron under my orders, consisting of the Bonhomme Richard of 40 guns, the Alliance of 36 guns, the Pallas of 32 guns, the Cerf of 18 guns, and the Vengeance of 12 guns, joined by 2 privateers, the Monsieur and the Granville, sailed from the road of Grog at daybreak on the 14th of August. The same day we spoke with a large convoy bound from the southwest to Brest. On the 23rd, we saw Cape Clear and the southwest part of Ireland. That afternoon, it being calm, I sent some armed boats to take a brigantine that appeared in the northwest quarter. Soon after, in the evening, it became necessary to have a boat ahead of the ship to tow, as the helm could not prevent her from laying across the tide of flood, which would have driven us into a deep and dangerous bay, situated between the rocks on the south called the Scalix, and on the north called the Blaskets. The ship's boats being absent, I sent my own barge ahead to tow the ship. The boats took the brigantine. She was called the Fortuned, and bound with a cargo of oil, blubber, and staves from Newfoundland for Bristol. This vessel I ordered to proceed immediately for Nantes or St. Malo. Soon after sunset, the villains who towed the ship cut the tow rope and decamped with my barge. Sundry shots were fired to bring them to without effect. In the meantime, the master of the Bonhomme Richard, without orders, manned one of the ship's boats and with 4 soldiers pursued the barge in order to stop the deserters. The evening was clear and serene, but the zeal of that officer, Mr. Cutting Lunt, induced him to pursue too far, and a fog, which came on soon afterwards, prevented the boats from rejoining the ship, although I caused signal guns to be frequently fired. The fog and calm continued the next day till toward the evening. In the afternoon, Captain Landis came on board the Bonhomme Richard and behaved towards me with great disrespect, affirming in the most indelicate manner and language that I had lost my boats and people through my imprudence in sending boats to take a prize. He persisted in his reproaches, though he was assured by Messrs. de Welbert and de Chamillard that the barge was towing the ship at the time of elopement, and that she had not been in pursuit of the prize. He was affronted because I would not the day before suffer him to chase without my orders, and to approach the dangerous shore I have already mentioned, where he was an entire stranger, and when there was not sufficient wind to govern a ship. He told me he was the only American in the squadron, and was determined to follow his own opinion in chasing when and where he thought proper, and in every other matter that concerned the service. And if I continued in that situation 3 days longer, the squadron would be taken. By the advice of Captain Jacataqua, and with the free consent and approbation of M. de Virage, I sent the surf in to reconnoitre the coast, and endeavor to take the boats and people the next day, while the squadron stood off and on in the southwest quarter, in the best possible situation to intercept the enemy's merchant ships, whether outward or homeward bound. The surf had on board a pilot well acquainted with the coast, and was ordered to join me again before night. I approached the shore in the afternoon, but the surf did not appear. This induced me to stand off again in the night in order to return and be rejoined by the surf the next day. But, to my great concern and disappointment, though I ranged the coast along and hoisted our private signals, neither the boat nor the surf joined me. The evening of that day, the 26th, brought with it stormy weather, with an appearance of a severe gale from the southwest. Yet, I must declare, I did not follow my own judgment, but was led by the assertion that had fallen from Captain Landis, when I in the evening made a signal to steer to the northward and leave that station, which I wished to have occupied a week longer. The gale increased in the night with thick weather. To prevent separation, I carried a top light and fired a gun every quarter of an hour. I carried also a very moderate sail, and the course had been clearly pointed out by a signal before night. Yet, with all this precaution, I found myself accompanied only by the brigantine Vengeance in the morning, the Granville having remained astern with the prize. As I have since understood, the tiller of the Pallas broke after midnight, which disabled her from keeping up, but no apology has yet been made in behalf of the Alliance. On the 31st, we saw the Flamy Islands situated near the Lewis, on the northwest coast of Scotland, and the next morning, off Cape Wrath, we gave chase to a ship to windward. At the same time, 2 ships appeared in the northwest quarter, which proved to be the Alliance, and a ship which she had taken, bound, as I understood, from Liverpool to Jamaica. The ship which I chased brought to at noon. She proved to be the Union Letter of Marque, bound from London to Quebec, with a cargo of naval stores on account of government, adapted for the service of the British armed vessels on the lakes. The public dispatches were lost, as the Alliance very imprudently hoisted American colors, though English colors were then flying on board the Bonhomme Richard. Captain Landis sent a small boat to ask whether I would man the ship or he would. As in the latter case, he should suffer no boat nor person from the Bonhomme Richard to go near the prize. Ridiculous as this appeared to me, I yielded to it for the sake of peace, and received the prisoners on board the Bonhomme Richard, while the prize was manned from the Alliance. In the afternoon another sail appeared, and I immediately made the signal for the Alliance to chase, but instead of obeying, he wore and laid the ship's head the other way. The next morning I made signal to speak with the Alliance, to which no attention was shown. I then made sail with the ships in company for the second rendezvous, which was not far distant, and where I fully expected to be joined by the Pallas and the surf. The 2nd of September, we saw a sail at daybreak and gave chase. That ship proved to be the Pallas, and had met with no success while separated from the Bonhomme Richard. On the 3rd, the Vengeance brought to a small Irish brigantine bound homeward from Norway. The same evening, I sent the Vengeance in the northeast quarter to bring up 2 prize ships that appeared to me to be too near the islands of Shetland. While, with the Alliance and Pallas, I endeavored to weather Fair Isle and to get into my second rendezvous, where I directed the Vengeance to join me with the 3 prizes. The next morning, have weathered Fair Isle, and not seeing the Vengeance nor the prize, I spoke the Alliance and ordered her to steer to the northward and bring them up to the rendezvous. On the morning of the 4th, the Alliance appeared again and had brought to 2 very small coasting sloops and ballast, but without having attended properly to my orders of yesterday. The Vengeance joined me soon after and informed me that in consequence of Captain Landis's orders to the commanders of the 2 prize ships, they had refused to follow him to the rendezvous. I am to this moment ignorant of what orders these men received from Captain Landis, nor know I by virtue of what authority he ventured to give his orders to prizes in my presence, and without either my knowledge or approbation. Captain Ricaud further informed me that he had burnt the prize brigantine because that vessel proved leaky, and I was sorry to understand afterward that, though the vessel was Irish property, the cargo was property of the subjects of Norway. In the evening, I sent for all the captains to come on board the Bonhomme Richard to consult on future plans of operation. Captains Cottenow and Ricaud obeyed me, but Captain Landis obstinately refused, and after sending me various uncivil messages, wrote me a very extraordinary letter in answer to a written order which I had sent him on finding that he had trifled with my verbal orders. The next day, a pilot boat came on board from Shetland, by which means I received such advices as induced me to change a plan which I otherwise meant to have pursued, and, as the surf did not appear at my second rendezvous, I determined to steer towards the 3rd in hopes of meeting her there. In the afternoon, a gale of wind came on, which continued 4 days without intermission. In the second night of that gale, the Alliance, with her 2 little prizes, again separated from the Bonhomme Richard. I had now with me only the Pallas and Vengeance. Yet I did not abandon the hopes of performing some essential service. The winds continued contrary, so that we did not see the land till the evening of the 13th, when the hills of Cheviot in the southeast of Scotland appeared. The next day we chased sundry vessels and took a ship and brigantine, both from the 5th of Edinburgh, laden with coal. Knowing that there lay an anchor in Leith Road an armed ship of 20 guns, with 2 or 3 fine cutters, I formed an expedition against Leith, which I purposed to lay under a large contribution, or otherwise to reduce it to ashes. Had I been alone, the wind being favorable, I would have proceeded directly up to the Firth, and must have succeeded, as they lay there in a state of perfect indolence and security, which would have proved their ruin. Unfortunately for me, the Pallas and Vengeance were both at a considerable distance in the offing, they having chased to the southward. This obliged us to steer out of the Firth again to meet them. The captains of the Pallas and Vengeance being come on board the Bonhomme Richard, I communicated to them my project, to which many difficulties and objections were made by them. At last, however, they appeared to think better of the designs after I assured them that I hoped to raise a contribution of 200,000 pounds sterling on Leith, and that there was no battery of cannon there to oppose our landing. So much time, however, was unavoidably spent in pointed remarks and sage deliberations that night that the wind became contrary in the morning. We continued working to windward up the Firth without being able to reach the road of Leith, till on the morning of the 17th, when being almost within cannon shot of the town, having everything in readiness for a descent, a very severe gale of wind came on, and being directly contrary, obliged us to bear away, and after having in vain endeavored for some time to withstand its violence. The gale was so severe that one of the prizes that had been taken on the 14th sunk to the bottom, the crew being with difficulty saved. As the alarm by this time had reached Leith by means of a cutter that had watched our motions that morning, and as the wind continued contrary, though more moderate in the evening, I thought it impossible to pursue the enterprise with a good prospect of success, especially as Edinburgh, where there is always a number of troops, is only a mile distant from Leith. Therefore, I gave up the project. On the 21st, we saw and chased 2 sail off Flamborough Head, the Palace in the northeast quarter, while the Bonhomme Richard followed by the Vengeance in the southwest. The one I chased, a brigantine collier in ballast belonging to Scarborough, was soon taken, and sunk immediately afterward, as a fleet then appeared to the southward. It was so late in the day that I could not come up with the fleet before night. At length, however, I got so near one of them as to force her to run ashore between Flamborough Head and the Spurn. Soon after, I took another, a brigantine from Holland, belonging to Sunderland, and at daylight the next morning, seeing a fleet steering toward me from the Spurn, I imagined them to be a convoy bound from London for Leith, which had been for some time expected. One of them had a pendant hoisted and appeared to be a ship of force. They had not, however, courage to come on, but kept back, all except the one which seemed to be armed, and that one also kept to windward, very near the land, and on the edge of dangerous shoals, where I could not with safety approach. This induced me to make a signal for a pilot, and soon afterward 2 pilot boats came off. They informed me that the ship that wore a pendant was an armed merchant ship, and that a king's frigate lay there in sight at anchor within the Humber, waiting to take under convoy a number of merchant ships bound to the northward. The pilots imagined the Bonhomme Richard to be an English ship of war, and consequently communicated to me that the private signal which they had been required to make. I endeavored by this means to decoy the ships out of the port, but the wind then changing, and with the tide becoming unfavorable for them, the deception had not the desired effect, and they wisely put back. The entrance of the Humber is exceedingly difficult and dangerous, and, as the palace was not in sight, I thought it not prudent to remain off the entrance. I therefore steered out again to join the palace off Flamborough Head. In the night, we saw and chased 2 ships until 3 o'clock in the morning, when, being at a very small distance from them, I made the private signal of recognizance which I had given to each captain before I sailed from Grog. 1/2 of the answer only was returned. In this position, both sides lay till daylight, when the ships proved to be the Alliance and the Palace. On the morning of that day, the 23rd, the brig from Holland not being in sight, we chased a brigantine that appeared laying to windward. About noon, we saw and chased a large ship that appeared coming around Flamborough Head from the northward, and at the same time I manned and armed one of the pilot boats to sail in pursuit of the brigantine, which now appeared to be the vessel that I had forced ashore. Soon after this, a fleet of 41 sail appeared off Flamborough Head, bearing north-northeast. This induced me to abandon the single ship which had then been anchored in Burlington Bay. I also called back the pilot boat and hoisted a signal for a general chase. When the fleet discovered us bearing down, all the merchant ships crowded sail toward the shore. The 2 ships of war that protected the fleet at the same time steered from the land and made the disposition for the battle. In approaching the enemy, I crowded every possible sail and made the signal for the line of battle, to which the Alliance showed no attention. Earnest as I was for the action, I could not reach the Commodore's ship until 7 in the evening. Being then within pistol shot, when we hailed the Bonhomme Richard, we answered him by firing a whole broadside. The battle thus begun was continued with unremitting fury. Every method was practiced on both sides to gain an advantage and rake each other, and I must confess that the enemy's ship, being much more manageable than the Bonhomme Richard, gained thereby several times an advantageous situation, in spite of my best efforts to prevent it. As I had to deal with an enemy of greatly superior force, I was under the necessity of closing with him, to prevent the advantage which he had over me in point of maneuver. It was my intention to lay the Bonhomme Richard athwart the enemy's bow, but as that operation required great dexterity and management of both sail and helm, and some of our braces being shot away, it did not exactly succeed to my wishes. The enemy's bowsprit, however, came over the Bonhomme Richard's poop by the mizzen mast, and I made both ships fast together in that situation which by the action of the wind on the enemy's sails forced her stern close to the Bonhomme Richard's bow, so that the ships lay square alongside of each other, the yards being all entangled, and the cannon of each ship touching the opponent's side. When this position took place, it was 8 o'clock, previous to which the Bonhomme Richard had received sundry 18-pound shots below the water and leaked very much. My battery of 12-pounders, on which I had placed my chief dependence, being commanded by Lieutenant Dale and Colonel Weybert, and manned principally with American seamen and French volunteers, were entirely silenced and abandoned. As to the 6 old 18-pounders that formed the battery of the lower gun deck, they did no service whatever. 2 out of 3 of them burst at the first fire and killed almost all the men who were stationed to manage them. Before this time, too, Colonel de Camillard, who commanded a party of 20 soldiers on the poop, had abandoned the station after having lost some of his men. These men deserted their quarters. I had now only 2 pieces of cannon, 9-pounders, on the quarter deck that were not silenced, and not one of the heavier cannon was fired during the rest of the action. The purser, Mr. Mies, who commanded the guns on the quarter deck, being dangerously wounded in the head, I was obliged to fill his place, and with great difficulty rallied a few men and shifted over one of the quarter-deck guns, so that we afterward played 3 pieces of 9-pounders upon the enemy. The tops alone seconded the fire of this little battery, and held out bravely during the whole of the action, especially the main top, where Lieutenant Stack commanded. I directed the fire of one of the 3 cannon against the main mass, with double-headed shot, while the other 2 were exceedingly well deserved with grape and canister shot to silence the enemy's musketry and clear her deck, which was at last effected. The enemy were, as I have since understood, on the instant of calling for quarters when the cowardice or treachery of 3 of my under-officers induced them to call to the enemy. The English Commodore asked me if I demanded quarters, and, I having answered him in the most determined negative, they renewed the battle with double fury. They were unable to stand the deck, but the fire of their cannon, especially the lower battery, which was entirely formed of 18-pounders, was incessant. Both ships were set on fire in various places, and the scene was dreadful beyond the reach of language. To account for the timidity of my 3 under-officers, the gunner, the carpenter, and the master-at-arms, I must observe that the 2 first were slightly wounded, and, as the ship had received various shots underwater, and one of the pumps being shot away, the carpenter expressed his fear that she would sink, and the other 2 concluded that she was sinking, which occasioned the gunner to run aft on the poop without my knowledge to strike the colors. Fortunately for me, a cannonball had done that before by carrying away the ensign's staff. He was therefore reduced to the necessity of sinking as he supposed, or of calling for quarter, and he preferred the latter. All this time the Bonhomme Richard had sustained the action alone, and the enemy, though much superior in force, would have been very glad to have got clear, as appeared by their own acknowledgments, and by their having let go an anchor the instant that I laid them on board, by which means they would have escaped, had I not made them well fast to the Bonhomme Richard. At last, at 9:30, the Alliance appeared, and I now thought the battle at an end. But, to my utter astonishment, he discharged a broadside full into the stern of the Bonhomme Richard. We called to him for God's sake to forbear firing into the Bonhomme Richard, yet he passed along the off side of the ship and continued firing. There was no possibility of his mistaking the enemy's ship for the Bonhomme Richard, there being the most essential difference in their appearance and construction. Besides, it was then full moonlight, and the sides of the Bonhomme Richard were all black, while the sides of the prizes were yellow. Yet for this greater security, I showed the signal of a reconnaissance by putting out 3 lanthorns, one at the head, another at the stern, and the third in the middle in a horizontal line. He passed round, firing into the Bonhomme Richard's head, stern, and broadside, and by one of his volleys killed several of my best men, and mortally wounded a good officer on the forecastle. My situation was really deplorable. The Bonhomme Richard received various shot under the water from the Alliance. The leak gained on the pumps, and the fire increased much on both ships. Some officers persuaded me to strike, of whose courage and good sense I have high opinion. My treacherous master-at-arms let loose all my prisoners without my knowledge, and my prospect became gloomy indeed. I would not, however, give up the point. The enemy's main mast began to shake. Their firing decreased, ours rather increased, and the British colors were struck at half an hour past 10 o'clock. This prize proved to be the British ship of war, the Serapis, a new ship of 44 guns, built on their most approved construction, with 2 complete batteries, one of them 18-pounders, and commanded by the brave Commodore Richard Pearson. I had yet 2 enemies to encounter far more formidable than the Britons. I mean, fire and water. The Serapis was attacked only by the first, but the Bonhomme Richard was assailed by both. There were 5 feet of water in the hold, and though it was moderated from the explosion of so much gunpowder, yet the 3 pumps that remained could, without difficulty, only keep the water from gaining. The fire broke out in various parts of the ship, in spite of all the water that could be thrown to quench it, and at length broke out as low as the powder magazine, and within a few inches of the powder. In that dilemma, I took out the powder upon deck, ready to be thrown overboard at the last extremity, and it was 10 o'clock the next day, the 24th, before the fire was entirely extinguished. With respect to the situation of the Bonhomme Richard, the rudder was cut entirely off the stern frame, and the transoms were almost entirely cut away. The timber, by the lower deck especially, from the mainmast to the stern, being greatly decayed with age, were mangled beyond my power of description, and a person must have been an eyewitness to form a just idea of the tremendous scene of carnage, wreck, and ruin that everywhere appeared. Humanity cannot but recoil from the prospect of such finished horror, and lament that war should produce such fatal consequences. After the carpenters, as well as Captain de Cantona and other men of sense, had well examined and surveyed the ship, which was not finished before 5 in the evening, I found every person to be convinced that it was impossible to keep the Bonhomme Richard afloat so as to reach a port if the wind should increase, it being then only a moderate breeze. I had but little time to remove my wounded, which now became unavoidable, and which was effected in the course of the night and the next morning. I was determined to keep the Bonhomme Richard afloat and, if possible, to bring her into the port. For that purpose, the first lieutenant of the Pallas continued on board with a party of men to attend the pumps, with boats in waiting ready to take them on board in case the water should gain on them too fast. The wind augmented in the night and the next day, on the 25th, so that it was impossible to prevent the good old ship from sinking. They did not abandon her till after 9 o'clock. The water was then up to the lower deck, and a little after 10 I saw with inexpressible grief the last glimpse of the Bonhomme Richard. No lives were lost with the ship, but it was impossible to save the stores of any sort whatsoever. I lost even the best part of my clothes, books, and papers, and several of my officers lost all their clothes and effects. Having thus endeavored to give a clear and simple relation of the circumstances and the events that have attended the little armament under my command, I shall freely submit my conduct therein to the censor of my superiors and the impartial public. I beg leave, however, to observe that the force that was put under my command was far from being well composed, and as the great majority of the actors in it had appeared bent on the pursuit of interest only, I am exceedingly sorry that they and I have been at all concerned. I am in the highest degree sensible of the singular attentions which I have experienced from the court of France, which I shall remember with perfect gratitude until the end of my life, and will always endeavor to merit while I can, consistent with my honor, continue in the public service. I must speak plainly, as I have been always honored with the full confidence of Congress, and as I have also flattered myself with enjoying in some measure the confidence of the court of France. I could not but be astonished at the conduct of M. de Chaumont, when, in the moment of my departure from Grasse, he produced a paper, a concordant, for me to sign in common with the officers which I had commissioned but a few days before. Had that paper, or even a less dishonorable one, been proposed to me at the beginning, I would have rejected it with just contempt, and the word displacement among others should have been necessary. I cannot, however, even now suppose that he was authorized by the court to make such a bargain with me, Nor can I suppose that the Minister of the Marine meant that M. de Chaumont should consider me merely as a colleague with the commanders of the other ships, and communicate to them not only all he knew, but all he thought, respecting our destination and operations. M. de Chaumont has made me various reproaches on account of the expense of Bonhomme Richard, wherewith I cannot think I have been justly chargeable. M. de Chamillard can attest that Bonhomme Richard was at last far from being well fitted or armed for war. If any person or persons who have been charged with the expense of that armament have acted wrong, the fault must not be laid to my charge. I had no authority to superintend that armament, and the persons who had authority were so far from giving me what I thought necessary that M. de Chaumont even refused, among other things, to allow me irons for securing the prisoners of war. In short, while my life remains, if I have any capacity to render good and acceptable services to the common cause, no man will step forth with greater cheerfulness and alacrity than myself. But I am not to be dishonored, nor can I accept of the half-competence of any man living. Of course, I cannot, consistent with my honor and a prospect of success, undertake future expeditions, unless when the object and destination is communicated to me alone, and to no other person in the marine line. In cases where troops are embarked, a like confidence is due alone to their commander-in-chief. On no other condition will I ever undertake the chief command of a private expedition, and when I do not command-in-chief, I have no desire to be in the secret. Captain Contino engaged the Countess of Scarborough and took her after an hour's action, while the Bonhomme Richard engaged the Serapis. The Countess of Scarborough was an armed ship of 26-pounders and was commanded by a king's officer. In the action, the Countess of Scarborough and the Serapis were at a considerable distance asunder, and the Alliance, as I am informed, fired into the palace and killed some men. If it should be asked why the convoy was suffered to escape, I must answer that I was myself in no condition to pursue, and that none of the rest showed any inclination, not even Emrico, who had held off at a distance to windward during the whole action, and withheld by force the pilot boat with my lieutenant and 15 men. The Alliance, too, was in a state to pursue the fleet, not having had a single man wounded or a single shot fired at her from the Serapis, and only 3 that did execution from the Countess of Scarborough, at such a different distance than one stuck in the side, and the other 2 just touched, and then dropped into the water. The Alliance killed 1 man only on board the Serapis. As Captain de Contino charged himself with manning and securing the prisoners of the Countess of Scarborough, I think the escape of the Baltic fleet cannot so well be charged to his account. I should have mentioned that the mainmast and the mizzen-topmast of the Serapis fell overboard soon after the captain had come on board the Bonhomme Richard. Upon the whole, the captain of the Alliance had behaved so very ill in every respect that I must complain loudly of his conduct. He pretends that he is authorized to act independently of my command. I have been taught to the contrary, but supposing it to be so, his conduct has been base and unpardonable. M. de Chamillard will explain the particulars. Either Captain Lundes or myself is highly criminal, and one or the other must be punished. I forbear to take any steps with him until I have the advice and approbation of your Excellency. I have been advised by all officers of the squadron to put M. Lundes under arrest, but as I have postponed it so long, I will bear with him a little longer until the return of my express. We this day anchored here, having since the action been tossed to and fro by contrary winds. I wish to have gained the road of Dunkirk on account of our prisoners, but was overruled by the majority of my colleagues. I shall hasten up to Amsterdam, and there, if I meet with no orders from my government, I will take the advice of the French ambassador. It is my present intention to have the Countess of Scarborough ready to transport the prisoners from hence to Dunkirk, unless it should be found more expedient to deliver them to the English ambassador, taking his obligation to send to Dunkirk immediately an equal number of American prisoners. I am under strong apprehensions that our object here will fail, and that, through the imprudence of M. de Chaumont, who has communicated everything he knew or thought on the matter to persons who cannot help talking of it at a full table. This is the way he keeps state secrets, though he never mentioned the affair to me. I am ever John P. Jones. Jacataqua. Terror enlarges the object, as does joy. The whole forest seemed to open, says the hunter of his first tiger. I don't know what its exact size may have been, but to me it seemed 30 feet high. So, by emotional grandeur, were the heroes of antiquity conceived, and so, to the joyful eye of the lover seems the object of his delight, bringing such wonder and awe that each motion, each look, is exaggerated, filled with power and significance, intensified to a degree that puts colder measurements aside. From this, the lore of romance has grown. In America, the legend of a horror before the war whoops of the Indians gives some inkling of a great dread the colonists experienced. But there's rarely a countering legend of joy. We believe that life in America is compact of violence, and this shock of immediacy. This is not so. Were it so, there would be a corresponding beauty of the spirit, to bear it witness, a great flowering, simple and ungovernable as the configuration of a rose, that should stand with the gifts of the spirit of other times and other nations as a standard to the humanity. There is none. The United States, without self-seeking, has given more of a material help to Europe and to the world in the last 10 years in time of need than have all other nations of the world put together in the entire history of mankind. It has stamped out yellow fever from the coast of South America, etc. It is our need that is crying out, that our immense wealth, the product of fear, a torment to the spirit, we sell, but carefully, to seek blessings abroad. And this wealth, all that is not pure accident, is the growth of fear. It is this which makes us the flaming terror of the world, a titan, stupid, as were all the giants, great, to be tricked or tripped from terror of us, with hatred barking at us by every sea, and by those most to whom we give the most. In the midst of wealth, riches, we have the inevitable Coolidge platform, sportatis, meek. This is his cure before the world, our goodness and industry. This will convince the world that we are right. It will not. Make a small mouth. It is the acme of shrewdness, of policy. It will work. We shall have more to give. Logical reasoning it is. Generous to save and give. It is bred of fear. It is as impossible for a rich nation to convince any one of its generosity as for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. Puritanical, pioneer. Out of the small white farmhouse, the product of delay. The characteristic of American life is that it holds off from embraces, from impacts, gaining, by fear, safety and time in which to fortify its prolific carcass, while the spirit, with tongue hanging out, bites at its bars, its object just out of reach. Wilson grazed heaven by his lewdness. The door stood open till it was slammed close. I relished the backdoor gossip that made him impossible. Delay, all through youth, halt, and cessation, not of effort, but of touch, all through life as it is learned, no end save accumulation, always upon the way is the bigger opportunity. We keep realization from the mind with a purpose till men are trained never to fully possess, but just to see. This makes scientists, and it makes the masochists. Keep it cold and small and under the cold lens. It is bastardization as of astronomy that has no counterpart with us in the aspirations or the conceits of the flesh. A passion equal to the straining of a telescope. Digressions. The American character is acquisitive, but mediate, like the Morgan interests. Mr. Franklin at the helm. The international mercantile marine that owns, as a mortgager, the White Star, the Red Star, the Atlantic Transport Lines, etc. American lines, but English ships. We own them. But who has them? A more practical race used to holding India. Crude as iron. What would be better tonight than a long hour of music, at ease and away from disturbance? A friend or two of the same humor with little talk now and again when the musician, since it should be a woman, rested. The pause before the sexual act, that interruption from desire that piles up a weight of energy behind it like stones do a river. The impossibility to attain is the source of all good in the world. The real reason for the Puritan. No, not all good, though so it seems to Americans. There is a kind of piling of experience upon experience that is not bound to satiety, but to wisdom, the highest knowledge of all, to Buddha, if one likes, to relief, to the dangerous ground of pleasure. Jinset de luz Prince Freud sees it, beyond the charmed circle. It is no matter, since it is unknown in the province I am discussing. Here, through terror, there is no direct touch. All is cold, little, and discreet, save just under the hide. There are no American servitors. An American will not serve another man. This is a fear. Nothing is so delightful as to serve another. Instead of that, we have service, the thing that Rabindranath Tagore so admired, telling us we did not know we had it, sending supplies to relieve the cyclone sufferers in Indiana. It is a passion, but to serve another with a heart or personal devotion is foreign to us, a trick for foreigners, a servant's trick. We are afraid that we couldn't do it and retain our self-esteem. We couldn't. Thus we see of what our self-esteem is made. Don't let's have any poor is our slogan. And we do not notice that the chief reason for this is that it offends us to believe that there are the essentially poor who are far richer than we are who give. The poor are ostracized. Cults are built to abolish them as if they were cockroaches and not human beings who may not want what we have in such abundance. That would be an offense. An American could not stomach. So down with them. Let everybody be rich and so equal. What a farce. But what a tragedy. It rests upon false values and fear to discover them. Do not serve another, for you might have to touch him, and he might be, beep. Do you realize the fascination the story of the white woman who had twin babies has for us? They accuse the woman of having had intercourse with the apartment's colored elevator boy. Her husband abandoned her at once. Of course, charming man. But you know Mendel's law. They discovered there had been a darky in his family 6 generations before. There's a denouement for every good American. Be careful whom you marry. Be careful, for you never know. Watch, wait, study. Deanimated, that's the word. Something the sound of metronome. A mechanical means, Yankee inventions. Machines were not so much to save time as to save dignity that fears the animate touch. It is miraculous that the energy that goes into inventions here. Do you know that it now takes just 10 minutes to put a bushel of wheat on the market from planting to selling, whereas it took 3 hours in our colonial day? That's striking. It must have been a tremendous force that would do that. That force is fear that robs the emotions. A mechanism to increase the gap between touch and thing, not to have a contact. America adores violence, yes. It thrills at big fires and explosions. This approaches magnificence. The finest firefighters in the world. We live not by having less fires, but more, by the excitement of seeing torturing things done well, with light ease even. But we have violence for service, market, battleships for peace. The force of enterprise for bringing bananas to the breakfast table, massive mining operations to transport us, whither? Bathrooms, kitchen, hospitals with a maximum of physical convenience and a minimum of waste to spare us. For what? We never ask. It is all a bar to more intimate shocks. Everything is for generosity and honor. It has to be for us to get away with it. Therefore, we cannot acknowledge, really, downright thievery in our friends. We can't get to it. Did we do so? We should know many things most disturbing to our peace of mind. Atlanta, Georgia is far worse than Paris for girls on the streets soliciting, but there is no good in it. I don't suppose there's ever been an American woman like Kiki or the delightful Baroness who paraded Fifth Avenue one day with a coal scuttle for a chapa. Naturally, they arrested her. Naturally, she would have been arrested in any city, but not, I imagine, with quite such a sense of duty as in America. To permit such a thing would cast a very awkward light on us all. The impact of the bare soul upon the very twist of the fact which is our world about us is un-American. That, we shun and rush off to the laboratory, the wheat field, hiding our indecent passion and meddling, playing, in a spirit of service. Our chemistry is all that. Salt away the profits and boast of our saving, stabilizing, constitution and dread, as of a glass heart, fiercely aligning ourselves in its defense as if it were something else than a mechanical shift. Men weaving women, women spouting men, colleges and streets torturing and annealing the machinery to cure cancer and kill mosquitoes, to carry fish in proper cars and fruit in others, to kill the Aedes aegyptus in the domestic water supply of Quito by the use of minnows in the house tanks. Our life is torturous and grotesque, huge fetishes by which we are ruled in utter darkness, or we fly abroad for sensation, anything to escape. We fear simplicity as the plague, never to allow touch. What are we but poor doomed carcasses, any one of us? Why then all this fury, this multiplicity we push between ourselves and our desires? Twisting and bending, that nervous habit of wanting to be thought pleasant, torturous and grotesque. It is the woman above all. There never have been women, save pioneer Katies. Not one in flowers save some moonflower Poe may have seen, or an unripe child. Poets? Where? They're the test. But a true woman in flower never. Emily Dickinson, starving of passion in her father's garden, is the very nearest we have ever been, starving. Never a woman, never a poet. That's an axiom. Never a poet saw sun here. Oh, men have women, millions of them, of course, good, firm Janes. But one that spouted any comprehensive joy? Never. Dolly Madison was a bright doll. At best, they want to be men, sit and be pal. It's all right. How could they do anything else with the men brutally beaten by the life? Do you know that Old Town records in Massachusetts show few men without 2 and many with as many as 7 wives? Not at all uncommon to have had 5. The first ones died shooting children against the wilderness like cannonballs. There's a reason for traditional cleverness, and we talk about the wilderness with affection. We are blind asses with our whole history unread before us and helpless if we read it. Nothing noticed, nothing taught in the academies. You'd think that would force us into some immediacy. Never. We write books deploring the post-war hilarity of our present-day girls. Mr. Hungerford assures the girls are no different now than they were before the rebellion. But Ben Franklin, who started black with an illegitimate son, was forced to turn white, poor Richard, to save himself. He saw the hell and warned us to save our pennies. So, too, spendthrifts Cleveland who became economists. Our life drives us apart and forces us upon science and invention, away from touch. Or if we do touch, our breed knows no better than the coarse fiber of football. Though Bill Bird says that American men are the greatest businessmen in the world, the only ones who understand the passion of making money, absorbed, enthralled in it. It's a game. To me, it is because we fear to wake up that we play so well. Imagine stopping money-making. Our whole conception of reality would have to be altered. But to keep a just balance between business and another object is to spoil the intoxication, the illusion, the unity even. It's very hard on the poet, who must be something or other in order to live. To live against the stream, Emily Dickinson, about the only woman one can respect for her clarity, lived in her father's backyard. Our breed knows no better than the coarse fiber of football. The despair we have for touching, the cheek, the breast, drives us to scream in beaten frenzy at the great spectacle of violence, or to applaud coldness and skill. Who is open to injuries? Not Americans. Get hurt, you're a fool. The only hero is he who is not hurt. We have no feelings for the tragic. Let the sucker who fails get his. What's tragic in that? That's funny. To hell with him. He didn't make good, that's all. It's a kind of celluloid of gaiety. I'm speaking of the theaters. A numbing coat that cuts us off from touch. Did you see the expression on Coolidge's face when A1 Jolson did his stuff before him on the White House lawn? Embarrassment, shame, fear to seem not to be amused, desire to get away. Very bad taste on everyone's part. But it was really funny to see. That jazz dose and the Puritan, something akin, both removed from simplicity, reality, and touch. Each his own way, that shaky shimmy and the shame. What is the result? The result is a thing that results, of course. Anyhow, it's curious to pick up results. You'll find tail ends of New England families, all burnt out, charming people, An old man marries a girl, male son aplenty, who sew and wash and make pies, embroider, select their mother's hats and dress fabrics, and paint pictures. Long, skinny men with emotional wits who have smelt losses. A bastard aristocracy. Men who, when their friends disappoint them, grow nervous and cry all night. It is because there are no women. These men are more out of place in pushing young America than a Chinaman or a Tibetan. Women, givers, but they have been as reservoirs, empty. Perhaps they are being filled now. Hard to deal with in business, more conservative, closer to earth, the only earth. They are our cattle of the spirit, not yet come in. None yet has raised benevolence to distinction, not one to wield her beauty as a scepter. It is a brilliant opportunity, but the aesthetic shown by American artists, the test of the women, is discouraging. The New England eunuchs, no more sex than a tapeworm. Faint echoes of England, perhaps of France, of Rousseau, as Valéry Larbaud insists. Rider, no detail in his foregrounds, just remote lusts, fiery but gone. Poe, Moonlight. It is the enunciation of the spiritual barrenness of the American woman. Violence. The newspapers are full of murder, but it is for the papers. That's not immediacy, but fear. It is the hysteria of cheated folk, similar to the outbreaks of murder and suicide in the Germanic countries after the war. The old man that murdered the woman with a Polish name and Perthen boy, it is so clear. A man without a woman finds one. She immediately starts to torture him. It's all they can do. Take it out of the son of a bitch. He's put himself in a compromising position and deserves to be castrated. Every force is piled against him. So he murders her. But is that a deed of passion? Surely not. Or the motion picture murders. It's the shriek of starvation. As Chariot said after his first abortive attempt to get a wife, such is life in the Great West. That land of wealth and promise. As Roosevelt said of Roosevelt after this last gubernatorial campaign in New York, he's a promising young man. Yes, it's a promising country. It's what the French say of our women in Paris, promising young women. Dr. Gaskin sensed it cynically. The ideals should end at the eyebrows and have the rest filled in with hair. It is a practical answer to the immediate American need. Pragmatism. It's inevitable that men shall go down the scale until they strike what they want or can get. There was a young medical fellow, a New Englander, in the state asylum at Worcester, a periodic maniac. His history fascinated me. He is a clever physician and a man of excellent antecedents. Shortly after college, and a medical education takes so long that a man is in his late 20s before he can afford to marry. He married a woman far below his class. He had to get her. Shortly realizing his fatal error, he promptly, being a sensitive man, went insane, and was as promptly divorced and committed to the asylum by his wife, proving the soundness of his mind, fundamentally. He has married 3 times since, and has always gone mad, a little like Strindberg, but the reasoning here is truly American. Trained a Puritan, he was bursting for lack of sexual satisfaction, unwilling to commit the sin of fornication, and being unable to get a wife of his own class, due to poverty or whatnot. He married someone below a scale of aesthetic or emotional relief. Thus, the greater was sacrificed to the lesser. Now he was overcome with anguish. His life was ruined. He bitterly assailed himself for his folly and lost all control. In the hospital, he worked well in the laboratory, but he was truly insane. There's no class to absorb the stress. There's the story of George Moore, the last time he was in New York, meeting at a tea some well-shaped American woman who was apparently intent upon showing herself to the world, though the poor thing probably didn't mean it. Moore asked her to go upstairs and undress for him that he might see her naked. She indignantly refused, of course, but I liked his gesture. Naturally, she didn't have to go as he wanted her to. Yet he nailed her, and he nailed us. I think he was sufficiently distinguished for her to have satisfied him. Or, if a girl is, not generous, but discerning with her whole body, that's it. A woman must see her with her whole body to be benevolent. If in the 8th grade, she begins to discern the depth of her necessity,
She is made to feel that there's something wrong about her. Not reckless, but fundamentally wrong. In contradistinction, a woman from Adrianople might be taught not that it is wrong to give herself, but that murder will follow it, or that it is a dangerous gift to be given rarely, but a gift. So she is shut up, like a French girl of better family, say, as we do wheat or a case of fine fruit. But the American girl who can run free must be protected in some other way, so she is frightened, if possible. She is a low thing, they tell her. She is made to feel that she is vicious, evil. It really doesn't do anything save alter the color of her deed, make it unprofitable. It scrapes off the bloom of the gift. It is puritanical envy. When she gives, it will probably be to the butcher boy, since she has been an apt pupil and believes that she is evil, believes even that her pleasure is evil. It is the central lie. But she is sure of it and gives her virginity to the butcher boy instead of having at least a decent romance. As Ken says, we get that, is, presuming we are poets, the daughters of the butcher. In the boarding school at Burlington, my friend, a teacher, was on the alert. The tension was horrible in this fashionable school. Several of the women were watching at points of vantage, with what feelings in their own hearts it would be easy to say. Soon, a soft whistle. Then the window opened, and the conventional knotted sheet ladder dropped out. There was a buggy down the road. Just as the second of the two girls reached the ground, they were both seized. In a wild scramble, the young fellows escaped. Yes, the butcher boy and his pal. Of course, these things cannot be permitted. Our girls have excellent physiques, really superb. I have often watched as who is not, for they are coming out. Some bather in the little stuff they wear today with acid passion. And there you are. They are fit only to be seen in shows, or in the train of a launch, on aquaplanes, 6 at a time, the swift motion only serving to give the authentic sense of slipperiness, pseudo-naiads without the necessary wildness in the chill, fit only to be seen by the box, like Oregon apples, bright and round but tasteless, wineless, wholesale. Why one of the hottest women that I know, lascivious in what might have been the sense in which I speak of it, but too timid, unable to stem the great American tide inimical to women, spent almost the whole war period in Washington. She was a Yao Manette, but employed her spare time spying on middle-aged men, majors with wives in Omaha, who were giving the nights to their stenographers, as it was done during the war. This girl's passion was horrible to behold. It turned slightly later, though she didn't perhaps perceive it, to other women. She wrote to me from time to time of her experiences. I liked her and enjoyed her letters. In one letter, among other things, she said that no one could imagine what it meant to a girl to lose her virginity. But yes, I could imagine it, better than she. It means everything in America. Well, of course, it has meant more than it does today, but I am tracing the tendency. It means that she gets such a violent jolt from her past teaching and such a sense of the hatred of the world, as she conceives it must be, against her that she is ready to commit suicide, or go to the dogs. That it might be the opening of wonders, of freedom to save the nation, that it might at least be an opportunity for practical use to the half of humanity that needs just that, never occurs to her. She is crushed, or one imagines she is. As a matter of fact, Wally Gould tells of the two Lewiston girls who were coming home by moonlight from a rendezvous in the woods with two boyfriends. One was crying, but the other sighed and said, "Well, that's over with." And next day, when the old fool of a neighbor was sending a box of candy to the widow, she dumped the sweets out and filled the box with horse manure. Intelligent, our girls are. Their minds are whip-like. If they don't rot, as did Martha's, she who beat the record of all years at Cornell, was secretary to Altman, was graduated as a trained nurse, and what a volcano of energy. Taught Greek in a school till she went mad at the slowness of the pupils, and married that marvelous little lame Irishman, Darby, who has the moods of a rose. What a woman, spending her life now as a servitor to women in the insane hospital on Ward's Island, after being an inmate for years there herself and recovering. What an energy wasted there. No place for it in the world save among the insane, especially no place for it in the United States. Whip-like intelligences, lost after a few years. Perverse, they derail, as Brancusi says, too easily. To them, Paris is bizarre, a place to spill the nerves, a bewildering surprise. They cannot carry a weight, as French women do their men, under the release of Paris. They're just useless, often coarse, lewd, drunk. What's that but unsatisfying? I salute them, because only for American women have I any deep fellow feeling, or at least they are the only ones that seem to me satisfying. Great experimenters with the emotions. Paris appears in so many literatures, and there are so many appearances that are Paris. Heaven knows whom they are influencing. I wish they could live at home. Imagine fleeing from the world to a woman, and leaving her, strengthened, fortified, above all, free to go. That costs money here. Of course, men should spend money upon women, especially American men. Of course, our history has been short and comparatively obscure for the most part. There must be character in out-of-the-way places, naturally, but none has raised the point of which I speak, to distinction. They existed, we know, degraded and demeaned in the pioneer camps, as in Maine, discredited save in a few bad narrative verses and short stories. Oh, any number of stories, drunk and waking up in a horse bed, etc. Many men tell of that primitive kindness and savoir-faire in the frontier camps. The purse returned with money intact. To that understanding one must bow. But there has been no genius in a woman to see a man's talent and coax it up, as did Miss Li, let us say, in the Chinese legend. Never a character to raise into story. The incidents of our lives are too completely surrounded by delays. The violence of our athletic games is mostly of a delay. Of course, it is fortunate that we are so active and fearless. The youth must be taken up somehow. It is taken up completely in a great many cases, though. A good many college athletes are burnt out in their 3 years of competition. It is too much. They frequently find it impossible to breed, if that were all. Poets, through energy, receive such a stamp of the age upon their work that they are marked, in fact, even in the necessities of their defeat, as having lived well in their time. Poets are defeated, but in an essential and total defeat at any time. That time is stamped in character upon their work. They give shape to the formless age as by a curious dye. And so, other times recognize them, the positives that created the forms which gave character and dignity to the damp mass of the overpowering but characterless resistance. So, Jacataqua gave to womanhood in her time the form which bitterness of pioneer character had denied it. At the left, with the company but not of it, silent in the midst of noise and laughter, one group accorded well with the wooded hill and quiet river. 20 or more Abenaki braves from Swan Island, picturesque in hunting garb. Perhaps none of all the company felt more interest and curiosity than did those dusky warriors, but their stolid faces and occasional guttural ejaculations gave no sign of the fire within. 3 paces in front of these silent braves stood their sachem, Jacataqua, a girl scarce 18, in whom showed the best traits of her mixed French and Indian blood. These Angles for whom we watch, who are they? She asked Squire Hallworth near her. Soldiers who go to fight the English at Quebec under Arnold. As the transports began to arrive in the 1100, disembarked. Captain Howard, commandant of Fort Westward, came up from the landing with the most notable of the guests. It was upon the reckless, dashing Arnold that all eyes were turned. Jacataqua's Abenakis stood in the same stolid silence, still a group apart. But the maiden herself, for once yielding to the wild pulses of her heart, stepped between the sturdy squires to a point of vantage whence she might gaze upon the warrior whom all men seemed to honor. One swift glance she gave the hero, then her black eyes met a pair as dark and flashing as her own, met and were held. She turned to the man at her side. That Angles. Who? That's young Burr, the one Cushing said got off a sick bed to come. Startled, she stepped back among her people. Young Burr, but wanted to gain his genial host's attention to ask, excitedly, "Who is that beauty?" "Jacataqua, Sachem of the Indians of Swan Island. You passed the wigwams of her people on the way up the river." In a moment, Burr was standing before the Indian princess, for the first and last time at a loss before a woman. Primitive and direct, it was she who opened the conversation and opened it with a challenge. "These," with a wave of her brown hand toward Howard and the group of officers, "these want meat. You hunt with me, I win." Advent of the slaves. The colored men and women whom I know intimately add a quality that is delightful to the life about me. There's little use, after all, save in a title, of speaking of the advent of the slaves. These were just men of a certain metal who came to America in ships, like the rest of us. The minor differences of condition were of no importance. The mere condition of their coming is of no importance. The colored men and women who I have known intimately have a racial character which has impressed me. One have not much bothered to know why, exactly, this has been so. The one thing that never seems to occur to anybody is that the Negroes have a quality which they have brought to America. It is not important that it is available or not to us for any special use. Poised against the Mayflower is the slave ship, manned by Yankees and Englishmen, bringing another race to try upon the New World. They'll prove its tenacity and ability to thrive by seizing upon the Christian religion, a thing to replace their own elephant, snake, in a guerrilla-filled jungle, on which to fasten for stability, blowing into it the soul of their own darkness, where, as were the Aztecs in their bloody chapels, they are founded. They helped to build a society that was rich and in some ways sumptuous and curiously oriental. Puritan Massachusetts, unable to rid itself of the idea of man's essential wickedness, could not envision this earthly paradise, Georgia. In many families, every child had his individual slave. Great gentlemen almost openly kept their concubines. Great ladies half dozed through the long summer afternoons on their shaded piazzas, mollified by the slow fanning of their black attendants, and by the laving of their feet in water periodically fetched anew from the spring house. It is a sunken quality, or it is a living quality. It is no matter which. All the rest is to keep from having to say anything more, like a Negro. It is their beauty. When they try to make their race an issue, it is nothing. In a chorus singing troubadour, they are nothing. But saying nothing, dancing nothing, nobody. It is a quality. Bert Williams, author of a Russian ballet, The Kiss. That's worse than nothing. But somewhere the sun am shining, for me. That's something. Taking his shoes off, that's something. Dancing, singing with the wild abandon of being close, closer, closest, together. Wagging, waving, weaving, shaking. Or alone in a cabin at night, in the stillness, in the moonlight, being nothing. With gravity, with tenderness, they arrive and walk all over God's heaven. There is a solidity, a racial irreducible minimum, which gives them poise in a world where they have no authority. Or a ramshackle castle, peaked with dolls' house gables all awry by the railroad, where the boys came with their brides in those good old days, just before the war. Old shoes and a shambling independence, a tigerish life, lived in defiance over a worthless son, by virtue of fierce courage, a heavy, fearless voice, and a desperate determination to be let alone, with two reminiscent, shrewd, remembering eyes stamping authenticity upon her words, and long gorilla arms to deal a heavy blow upon man or woman who may threaten her, with a shouted threat of knife thrust or hatchet stroke if that fails. She was knocked down, bellowing like a buffalo, maltreated. By whom? You wouldn't get it out of her. But she announced to whoever has ears, in this place or the next, that it wouldn't happen another time, and it hasn't. On a Saturday night, shuffling along absorbed with slow, swinging gait, or staring into odd corners, or settling back on her heels with a belligerent scowl if greeted, ready to talk. Why, how are you? Anywhere. Go ahead, kill me. I ain't afraid of you. I remember when, with thrilling pleasure and deep satisfaction, E.K. Means' tale, Diada, Daughter of Discord,
an outstanding story of a wild Negro wench, billeted upon a friend's family by her owner while he went for a short boat trip without her. Read Diada, cutting cane stalks, sharpening them with lightning speed and driving them through the attacking hounds. Faces like old Florentine oak. Also, the set pieces of your face stir me, leading citizens, but not in the same way. Nothing makes much difference to Odie. Butcher knife, butcher knife. Mr. Gould wants you. It's a quality, the same as sweet everlasting voices be still. Of the colored men and women whom I have known intimately, the most loquacious is M, who can't eat eggs because it gives him the hives. Language grows in the original from his laughing lips. You know that bloom of youth stuff, his shy, crooked smile, weary, slow, topping his svelte figure, his straight, slim 6 feet of willowy grace, drooping from the shoulders, smiling sleepy eyes. White blood and colored blood don't mix, said he, nursing his injury. Doc, I got a hemorrhage of the flute, he said. Cocaine for horses, cocaine for mules, in the trenches, he yelled, as I removed the bandage. I'm going to feed this to the ducks, he said. The relief is never ending, never failing. It is water from a spring to talk with him. It is a quality. I wish I might write a book of his improvisations and slang. I wish I might write a play in collaboration with him. His old man is a different sort. I once made several pages of notes upon his conversation, but I lost them. He was an able fisherman along the North Atlantic shore, resisting an eel. In the hold of the vessel, when they were packaging porgies, ice, and fish fill in the holes of the long schooner in heavy layers, it was he who could stay down there and work longest. For sheer sordidness, we never touched them. The desperate drunkenness upon foul stuff in which they nearly die in a heap of rags under the eaves in the attic of some revolting, disease-ridden female's dump, fly-covered, dazed. For purity of religious devotion and the simplicity of their maneuvers, they exceed our greatest application. Personal cleanliness becomes them with an oriental grace before which our ablutions pale to insignificance. They wear the best fabrics that money can buy, man and woman alike. It is nothing. Nothing. There was Georgie Anderson, whom I remember as some female who walked upon air and light in her wild girlhood. And there was Dudu, gentle as the dew or rain in April, but I knew she had a temper for those who offended her. And there are many others. Put them on a ship under any circumstances you may fancy, and you have them coming. Why for? Nothing. As old man Hemby said to me at the door, I'm here. I come after you yesterday, but I couldn't find you. Doctor, I'm in a bad fix. I want you to do something for me.